Some decisions feel final until life throws you back to the place you left behind. Seattle International Airport buzzed with familiar sounds, the rhythmic drag of suitcase wheels, echoing announcements, the occasional wail of a tired child. Amid it all, Camille Rhodes moved with quiet determination, cradling her baby daughter Mira against her chest. The oversized gray hoodie she wore couldn't hide the shadows under her eyes. Traces of 13 months without rest, working 2 jobs, mothering alone. But her eyes held something unshakable, a flicker of resolve, a belief, stubborn and quiet, that Florence held something better, a reset. Mira was fast asleep, her tiny fingers unconsciously clutching the zipper of Camille's jacket. Her skin was a soft caramel, her eyebrows arched in a way that had, more than once, made Camille turn away quickly, afraid her heart might shatter. Don't think about that. Don't look back. She found an empty seat near a window by the departure gate and exhaled slowly. The overstuffed diaper bag at her feet held everything needed for escape: wipes, bottles, mashed food pouches, and a folded letter from a translation firm in Florence. "We are pleased to offer you the position of Italian-English translator." The salary was modest, but Florence offered something Camille had longed for: distance from the past, from the man who disappeared, from the pain she'd had no choice but to survive. Not far away, Julian West stood beside a floor-to-ceiling window, watching planes taxi with distracted eyes. His navy blazer fit like it was tailored for success, because it was. His phone lit up with praise. The keynote at the Global Travel Startup Summit had landed perfectly, and yet he felt nothing. Accolades, packed schedules, 5-star hotel rooms, all of it blurred together now, an endless loop that no longer excited him. He couldn't remember the last time he spoke to someone not paid to work for him. "There's no one left to go home to," an alert buzzed on his screen. His flight to Boston had been delayed 3 hours. He turned to search for a quiet corner to take some calls. That's when he saw her. Her Camille, just under 30 yards away, holding a child in her arms, a sleeping little girl. Something about her caught him. The eyebrows, the hand, the way the baby nestled against Camille like she belonged there, like she always had. Julian's heart skipped, then thudded hard. A memory returned like a slap, the final argument, the slammed door, the silence he never dared break. He'd told himself Camille would be better without him. He left and never looked back until now. Julian stood frozen, his eyes locked on the sleeping child in Camille's arms. She was barely the size of a backpack, yet somehow she carried the weight of every unasked question, every buried decision, now materialized in the form of a little girl. Could she be? No way, Camille would have told him, wouldn't she? But those eyebrows, that shape, his mother's exact arch, and the way the baby nestled into Camille's neck, like she'd always known that scent, that wasn't just any baby. A wave of panic surged through Julian. His legs moved before his brain caught up, as if some part of him knew that if he didn't move now, he'd lose something he could never recover. He crossed the terminal, his polished shoes clacking against the marble floor, though the sound was drowned by the roar in his ears. He hardly registered the people around him. Business travelers, families, airport noise. All of it faded. There was only her. Camille, just 10 meters away now. She hadn't seen him yet. Her focus was on the child. She gently adjusted the baby's blanket, her hand brushing over her like a practiced motion of instinct and affection. Something tightened in Julian's throat. 2 years ago, he told himself he wasn't ready for this kind of life, for all the messiness and emotion and weight. He chose Tokyo. He chose work. He chose silence. And now, looking at the child that bore his face, all of those choices felt like knives twisting deep inside him. Camille looked up like some sixth sense alerted her, and their eyes met. The world stopped. Time collapsed. All the silence, all the pain, every what if they rushed into that moment of recognition. She didn't run. She didn't flinch. She just froze. Julian stepped closer, his voice catching in his throat. "Camille." Her voice was calm, but her eyes dimmed slightly. "Julian." He looked down at the child. "How old is she?" She hesitated for a breath, then answered like a sentence passed down. 13 months. 13. Julian's mind raced. That was right after they last saw each other. Right after he walked out. Right when he'd boarded that flight and never looked back. He stumbled back slightly, shaken. "You? Why didn't you tell me?" It sounded like accusation, but it wasn't. It was desperation, thinly veiled as blame. He needed something, anything, to explain the ache rising in his chest. Camille tightened her hold on Moreau. There wasn't anger in her eyes, just exhaustion, the kind you earn from too many lonely nights. "I tried," she said quietly. "You changed your number. Your email bounced. Your assistant told me, and I quote, 'Mr. West is unavailable for personal matters.' I went to your office. Security stopped me in the lobby. I didn't abandon you, Julian. You locked the door yourself." Julian couldn't speak. He remembered those weeks after the breakup, how he told his staff to screen everything, to protect his focus. He thought he was streamlining, prioritizing success. He was shutting out the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Julian couldn't breathe. Camille sat there, Mira curled against her chest like the whole world had condensed into a single space, one that had no room for him. Truth peeled itself back, layer by painful layer, and every piece was sharper than the last. "I was wrong," Julian whispered, voice rough like crushed gravel. "Back then, I was scared. Scared to be a father. Scared to turn into my own dad. Scared I'd ruin you." Camille gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "Hollow? So your solution was to vanish? Not even a conversation? Not even a chance for me to speak?" Julian nodded. Any words he had left felt cowardly in her presence. "Do you even realize what you missed, Julian?" Camille asked, her voice low but razor-edged. He didn't respond. She held his gaze, not in anger, but in exhaustion. "You weren't there for the first ultrasound, when my hands shook filling out forms alone, asking questions I didn't know how to phrase. You weren't there when I stood in the snow, 8 months pregnant, waiting for a bus to my night shift cleaning office buildings. You weren't there in the delivery room when I screamed and cried and had to sign consent forms alone in case anything went wrong." Julian felt his chest tighten, but Camille wasn't done. "You didn't see Mira's first breath, didn't hear her first cry, didn't know she had mild jaundice and spent 2 nights in an incubator. I sat there, watching her tiny body under that blue light, unable to touch her, unable to do anything. The first night home, she wouldn't sleep. I had no idea what to do. I held her, sobbing, humming half-finished lullabies because I couldn't get through a single song without breaking down. She looked down at Mira as if those memories were still living under her skin. There were nights I thought I wouldn't survive. I nursed her while typing translation jobs at 2 a.m. I had to choose between formula or paying the electric bill. Some months I didn't turn on the heater. I just wrapped her in extra coats. Her voice grew quieter. "I used to imagine you were there, you know? That maybe you'd come back. Hold Mira and say you were ready. I named her Mira because it was the name we joked about once. Remember that? Mira means miracle." Julian clenched his fists. He remembered. Every word, every tiny thing now felt like a nail in the coffin of who he thought he was. "She has your eyes," Camille said softly. "Every time someone says she looks just like her dad, I smile. Then I turn away before I break down." Julian bent slightly, as if someone had punched him in the gut. Guilt wrapped around him like smoke. He hadn't just left Camille. He had erased himself from a child's life. A child who bore his name, his eyes, his silence. "I thought I was protecting you from me," he murmured. "But all I did was abandon you." Camille looked at him, calm, resolute. "I didn't need your protection. I needed your presence. Not for me, for her." He could barely meet her eyes. "Camille, I don't know how to fix this, but if you let me, I'll learn." She stared at him, long and unblinking. I don't want promises. I want action. And Mira, she needs someone who shows up, not just today because you're drowning in guilt, but tomorrow and the day after, every single day. The gate announcement echoed through the terminal. Final boarding for Florence. Last call for all remaining passengers. Camille glanced down at her boarding pass, then looked up at Julian. "Give me 5 minutes," he said softly, "to say what I should have said 2 years ago." She paused, then nodded. 5 minutes, go." Julian didn't even get to start his 5 minutes before Mira stirred. She let out a soft sound, the kind babies make between sleep and waking, then opened her eyes, big, round, and still foggy with dreams. Camille immediately turned her full attention to the baby, whispering softly, "Shh, Mira, it's okay, Mama's here." Julian stood frozen. He didn't dare move. He didn't dare breathe. Mira blinked up at him, and then, unexpectedly, she reached. Tiny arms lifted, fingers flexing in that universal gesture of need, of want, of trust. No one spoke. The air stretched thin with disbelief. Camille went rigid. Mira wasn't the kind of baby who warmed easily to strangers. She clung tightly to Camille around unfamiliar faces. And yet now, she was leaning forward, reaching, like she'd spotted someone she already knew in a place too deep for memory. Julian couldn't move. Those outstretched hands pierced straight through him, through the guilt, through the years, through the walls he'd built. "He's reaching for me," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. Camille held Mira tighter, instinctively protective, but paused. Those tiny arms stayed outstretched. Mira wasn't crying. She was watching Julian with that intense, unblinking curiosity only babies possessed. "She does that with everyone," Camille said quickly, her voice catching on the lie. Julian took a cautious step forward, then another. He knelt, slowly, his eyes locked with Mira's. "Hi, Mira," he whispered. "Little star." She looked at him, then made a soft sound. A babble with no meaning, but full of intent. And again those hands stretched, determined now. Julian lifted his hand. The moment his fingers brushed hers, his heart skipped a beat. Mira gripped his finger, slightly, instinctively, yet somehow it felt like the entire world shifted. Carefully, awkwardly, he reached out. Mira came willingly, nestling into his chest like it was the most natural place to be, her head tucked under his chin, her fingers curled into his jacket, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. Julian held her, tentative, breathless, terrified to do it wrong. But Camille didn't stop him. She stood back, arms at her sides, watching a moment she had imagined in dreams but never thought would come. Mira exhaled a tiny sigh, the kind babies make when they've found something warm and safe. Her whole body relaxed into him, trusting completely. Julian stood there, holding her, his eyes shining. Nothing in his life, no pitch, no achievement, no luxury suite had ever felt like this. Camille looked at the two of them, her daughter in the arms of the man she had once loved, the man who had left, but who now looked utterly unrecognizable in the best way. A final call echoed. Gate C 22 closing. Final boarding for Florence. Camille gripped her boarding pass tightly. Julian didn't glance at the gate. He was watching his daughter, and his face, once so composed, was raw now, open. Not the face of a CEO, but of a man undone by the smallest hands he'd ever held. "She knows me," he said, voice thick. "Camille, did you see that? She knows me." Camille said nothing, but inside, something was shifting. Julian still held Mira in his arms, the weight of her tiny body feeling like the whole world, his world, one he'd thrown away 2 years ago. And now it was here, real, warm, fragile, and ready to leave him behind again. Another airport announcement rang out. "Final boarding for Gate C 22. All remaining passengers, please proceed to the gate." Camille glanced at her watch. Her fingers gripped the crumpled boarding pass tightly. Her eyes flicked to her suitcase, the job offer, the neatly packed future she'd spent 8 months building, for herself and for Mira. Julian looked up at her, eyes raw. His voice was hoarse, breaking. "Mia, please, don't go." She inhaled sharply, like she was trying not to break in two. "I planned this life, Julian. Carefully, thoughtfully. You don't just show up at the last minute and rewrite everything." "I know," he said, holding Mira close, the baby content in his arms. "I don't expect forgiveness. Not yet. But if you walk away now, I lose the only chance I'll ever have to be her father." Camille bit her lip, her eyes glistening. "So what do you want me to do, Julian? Throw away everything I've worked for because you just realized what matters?" "No," Julian said quickly. "I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm just asking for 5 minutes. Let me say what I should have said a long time ago." She stared at him, not just hearing his words, but reading the way he held Mira, the way his arms instinctively supported her, the way his whole body had softened. "I'm not going to try to fix this with money," Julian added, "or promises. But if you give me 5 minutes, I'll use every second to speak from my heart." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint sounds of Mira shifting and Camille's unsteady breath. At last, Camille sat down on the nearest seat, dropping her bag by her feet. "Fine, 5 minutes," she said softly. "That's all, Julian, and after that, I still might walk away." Julian nodded, holding Mira like a lifeline, his eyes locked on Camille, as if in that fragile space of 5 minutes, the course of his life was about to change. And maybe, just maybe, 5 minutes was enough to begin. Camille hesitated. Her instincts told her to hold her, but Mira's eyes were steady, her tiny hand still outstretched toward Julian. Unafraid, unwavering, and for a fragile moment, Camille let go, letting her daughter make her first choice. Julian sat down, Mira still nestled in his arms, peaceful, quiet. Her tiny fingers remained curled into the lapel of his jacket, like they'd belonged there all along. Camille sat across from him. Her eyes weren't cold anymore, but they weren't soft either. She watched every move he made, how he supported Myra's head, how his hands trembled slightly, how his gaze never left the child in his arms. "She's heavier than I expected," Julian murmured, mostly to himself. Camille offered a faint smile. "That's 13 months of growing you missed." He nodded, holding Mira a little closer. She leaned her head on his shoulder, gave a long, sleepy yawn, and snuggled deeper into the curve of his neck. And maybe, for her, it really did feel like home. "I never thought I'd be a father," Julian said, eyes on his daughter. "I was terrified I'd turn out like mine, absent, angry, always making people feel like they weren't enough." "I get that," Camille said gently. "But you don't have to live in reaction to who he was. You can choose who you become." Julian looked up at her. "I'm not sure I know how, but if Mira can trust me, just from instinct, then maybe I can learn to trust myself." Mira shifted again, her head tilting, mouth slightly open in the soft haze of baby sleep. Julian gently rubbed her back, the motion hesitant, unfamiliar, but full of care. Camille watched it all, the man who once vanished now holding their daughter with a tenderness she didn't know he possessed. She dreamed of this moment, hated it, grieved it. Now it was here, unplanned, unpolished, but real. "I don't want to be a father in name only," Julian continued. "I want to be the person she runs to when she's scared, when she's sick, when she just wants someone to hum a lullaby, badly, off-key." Camille inhaled deeply. "Then you need to understand, being a father isn't about showing up when it's convenient. It's about being there every day. When she's sick at 2 a.m., when dinner ends up on the floor, when she screams for me and refuses to let you hold her." Julian nodded. No argument, no defense. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I'll do it. Not because I have to, but because she deserves it." They sat in silence for a moment. Mira was between them, tiny, calm, unaware that she had just tethered two people who had once been completely undone by each other. Maybe this wasn't a family yet, but it was a beginning. A final announcement echoed, cold and mechanical. Gate C-22 is now closed. The flight to Florence is preparing for departure. Camille turned, looking through the window just in time to see the plane slowly pulling away, lights blinking like fading stars on a horizon she no longer chased. She didn't get up, didn't panic, didn't regret. Julian remained seated beside her, Mira asleep in his arms, peaceful, as if unaware that the world had just quietly shifted direction. Camille closed her eyes, exhaled slowly. They had missed a flight, but it wasn't a loss. Some flights are meant to be missed, to pull you back to where you were always meant to stay, to let you rewrite fate, not in some grand gesture, but in the quiet decision to remain. With Mira fast asleep in his arms, Julian looked up at Camille, his gaze no longer that of a man who once walked away, but of someone trying to step toward what he should have never left. "Give me 2 weeks," he said softly. 2 weeks in Seattle. You don't have to promise me anything, just give me a chance to learn how to be a father, not from a distance, but right there, beside both of you. Camille stayed silent for a long while. She should have said no, she had every reason to, but after so many lonely nights, her heart still held a fragile space for something kind, even if it came late. "All right," she whispered. 2 weeks, no more, and you'll have to prove it every single day. 3 a.m. A strange, piercing cry shattered the quiet sleep inside their cozy Airbnb in Seattle. Camille was up first, as always, but this time Julian wasn't far behind. He rushed out from the adjacent room, nearly slipping on the hardwood. "What's wrong? What's happening?" Camille had Mira in her arms, already checking her temperature. "She's burning up, might be teething, or maybe caught a chill, but this fever, it's not mild." Julian panicked. "Should we call someone, an ambulance? What do we do?" "Not yet. I've got fever medicine. Just stay calm. She doesn't need more fear right now." But he couldn't stop trembling. Mira looked so fragile, flushed cheeks, glassy eyes, her cries faint and pitiful. Julian had never seen her like this. It was like watching a part of himself in pain. Camille pressed the baby to her chest, humming low, trying to soothe her. Julian stood there, fists clenched, helpless. Can I hold her?" he asked, voice hoarse. She hesitated only for a moment, then gently passed Mira into his arms. No resistance this time. Julian held his daughter with both clumsiness and care. She still whimpered, but when her cheek rested against his chest, her breathing started to slow. He swayed, mimicking what he'd seen Camille do countless times. "Shh, Daddy's here, little one," he whispered. "You're okay now. Daddy's got you." Camille stepped back, watching, saying nothing, just witnessing a father and child find each other in the middle of a fevered night, where the bond was forged not in calm, but in chaos. Mira stopped crying, her breathing grew even, her eyes fluttered closed. Julian kept swaying. Time didn't exist anymore. Nothing mattered except this, keeping her safe. And in that moment, for the first time since learning he was a father, Julian finally understood something. Love doesn't show up in perfect photos or sweet words. It shows up at 3 a.m. during a fever when she needs him most, and he chooses to stay. The days after Mira's fever passed felt like a strange, gentle dream. No more urgent meetings, deadlines, or nonstop phone calls, just bottle schedules, diaper changes, and lullabies. Julian was learning everything from scratch, and he was learning fast. The first time he changed a diaper, he looked like he was disarming a bomb. Camille laughed until her eyes watered when he ended up with Mira's mess all over his shirt. But Julian didn't quit. He figured out how to warm the bottle just right, how to pick out Mira's solid foods, and how to burp her gently after each meal. "She likes it when someone reads to her," Camille mentioned one night. Julian nodded. That evening, he read Mira a short story about a lost fox. His voice was shaky at first, but the way Mira stared up at him made him more confident. She didn't understand a single word, but her eyes said it all. Daddy's trying, and that means everything. Between the sweet moments came the hard ones. Mira cried all night from teething, and Julian stayed up, eyes red, gently rocking her back to sleep. Sometimes Camille lost patience, tired of explaining things he should have known. But every time Julian quietly said, "I'm still here," the tension melted. One lazy afternoon, the three of them lay on the carpet, Mira crawling between them, gripping a musical toy. Camille watched them and felt something quiet, powerful, settle in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. Julian wasn't just trying to be a father, he was one. Every time Mira fell while trying to walk, he rushed over, kissed her forehead, and comforted her with the softest voice. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he was doing everything he could not to lose any more time. Camille caught Julian's gaze as he lifted Mira into his arms once more. In his eyes, she saw love, commitment, and a change she could no longer deny. Even though the days they spent together were filled with Mira's laughter and peaceful moments that resembled family life, Camille still carried a quiet fear deep inside her. She watched Julian every night. When he gently rocked Mira to sleep, when he soothed her after a tantrum because she couldn't chew the TV remote, when he read the same picture book for the 4th time without complaint. He was trying. So much. But the fear inside her didn't go away. What happens, she wondered, when work calls him away, when life gets bigger than this little apartment? She used to believe Julian would never leave her. But he did. He didn't listen. And for the first year of Mira's life, Camille had survived every fever, every sleepless night, every storm, alone. One night, after Mira had fallen into a deep sleep, Camille sat by the window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. Julian walked over and sat beside her. He didn't speak at first, just sat quietly. "I know you still don't trust me," Julian said softly, "and I don't blame you." Camille turned toward him, her eyes tired. "You've said all the right things before." "Then you disappeared." Julian nodded. "Back then, I was scared. Scared of failing, scared I wasn't enough. I thought, if I stayed away, I wouldn't hurt anyone. But you still hurt us," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just honest. Julian looked down. "Now, every time Mira calls me Papa and runs into my arms, I understand. I understand what I missed. I understand what it means to love someone so much you're afraid to breathe too hard in case they vanish." Camille studied him for a long time. Doubt still lingered in her eyes, but it was quieter now. "I don't need you to be perfect, Julian. I just need you not to disappear again." "I can't promise the future," Julian whispered, "but I can promise one thing. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, I'll still be here, and the morning after, and the one after that." They didn't hug, there was no cinematic kiss, but in that quiet moment Camille knew. She wanted to believe again. Not for Julian's sake, but for Mira's. Because their daughter deserved the chance to grow up in a complete family. That weekend, Seattle finally offered a bit of sun after days of gray. Camille suggested they go out, just a stroll through the downtown farmers market. Julian agreed without hesitation, though it would be his first time out with both Camille and Mira as a trio. Mira sat in a little yellow stroller Camille had borrowed from the neighbor downstairs. She wore a soft cream-colored beanie and clutched a stuffed bunny nearly as big as she was. Every time the wheels bumped over a crack in the sidewalk, she giggled, like the world had bounced just to entertain her. Julian pushed the stroller, coffee in one hand. Camille had bought it for him. She walked beside him, watching him blend into the rhythm of everyday life. No phone glued to his ear, no suit, just a hoodie, sneakers, and a dad bending down every few minutes to chat with his baby girl. "Papa!" Mira suddenly called out, pointing toward a pile of red apples. Julian blinked. "You want apples, little one? So many apples!" She squealed with joy, stretching her arms like she was picking the perfect pair of shoes. Camille laughed out loud. Julian followed, laughing freely, without hesitation. They picked out vegetables, fruits, whole grain bread, and a jar of handmade honey from an old woman on the corner. On the walk back, Mira dozed off in her stroller, still gripping her bunny's ear. Julian gently pulled his jacket over her like a blanket. Camille watched him, something softer flickering in her eyes. "You just did something really ordinary," she said. Julian smiled. "It doesn't feel ordinary to me." "I know." They walked on in silence, but in that moment, sunlight warming Mira's hair, Julian's hand resting gently on her shoulder, Camille felt something tender. Something that looked and felt almost like family. 2 weeks passed faster than Camilla expected. Life with Julian, though it started with hesitation, had become surprisingly peaceful. Mira was used to hearing her father's voice every morning, sitting between her parents at dinner, and falling asleep on Julian's chest as he read to her in his calm, steady tone. But today was the last day. Camille sat on a park bench across from the temporary apartment they had been staying in. In her hand was the email reminder from the firm in Paris. They needed a final answer. Julian sat beside her, silent. Mira was asleep in the stroller, a moon-printed blanket covering her tiny body. "I know today's the deadline," Julian said, eyes on Mira. "I don't want to pressure you, but I also can't pretend this doesn't matter." Camille clenched the phone. "I've planned for Paris for almost a year. I have a job waiting, a school for Mira, a place to live." "I know," Julian nodded, "and you've done it all alone. I can't take that away from you. But if there's even a chance, just a chance, for Mira to have both her parents, not a perfect family, just 2 people who love her, would you consider it?" She was silent for a long time. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead. "You've done well," Camille said quietly. "You didn't run when Mira got sick. You woke up every night she cried. You read to her every evening. I was watching to see if you really changed. And maybe you have." Julian looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "But I'm still scared," she continued. "Scared I'll wake up one day and you'll choose work again. Scared Mira will feel abandoned." He nodded slowly. "I can't promise to be perfect, but I can promise I won't disappear. Not when you need me. Not when Mira needs me." Camille looked at Mira, soft hair across her forehead, lips slightly parted in sleep. The little girl didn't know that today her mother would make a decision that would reshape both of their lives. "I could stay in Seattle," Camille whispered. "Not because I've forgiven everything, but because Mira deserves the chance to know her father. And you deserve the chance to make it right." Julian exhaled, a breath so quiet it barely existed. He didn't reach out to hug her, didn't rush. He simply touched her hand gently, a gesture full of gratitude. "Thank you," he said. Mira stirred, eyes fluttering open. When she saw both of them, she smiled and reached out, tiny hands grasping 2 fingers, one from each parent. And in that moment, Camille understood. Her decision wasn't about staying or going. It was about choosing to believe again. 6 months later, Seattle welcomed autumn with flaming maple trees, each red leaf drifting to the ground like a whisper of passing time. Camille stood in the small kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, while Mira waddled around clutching her one-eared teddy bear. Julian walked in, sleeves rolled up, carrying a basket of fresh fruit from the weekend market. "Papa!" Mira squealed, waving as if greeting a returning hero. "Did someone miss Daddy?" Julian grinned, lifting her up and spinning her around in the sun-drenched kitchen. Mira laughed wildly, her little hands clinging tightly to his collar. Camille watched them and smiled, not the smile of someone lost in dreams, but the smile of someone who's walked through wreckage and finally found a place worth staying. They were no longer who they used to be. Camille was no longer guarded. Julian no longer ran. Their life wasn't a fairy tale, but every ordinary day, they wrote something close to it, slow, quiet, but real. Mira brought over a handful of crayons, offering them like treasure. Julian sat cross-legged on the floor. Camille joined. The 3 of them drew suns, trees, a little house with smoke curling from the chimney. the house Mira now called home. Dusk came. Dinner was simple: toasted bread, pumpkin soup, and a light glass of wine. Mira went to bed early that night. Julian tucked her in, gently covered her with a blanket, then returned to Camille, where soft golden light spilled from their tiny balcony. "I still can't believe it," he whispered, fingers gently finding hers, "that you chose to stay." "I didn't stay for you," Camille replied, a knowing smile on her lips. "I stayed for Mira, and because I didn't want to leave anymore." Julian nodded. "And you know what? This isn't starting over. This is starting right." In the quiet of the evening, they sat side by side. No grand declarations. No promises shouted to the stars. Because now they understood. Love doesn't need to be loud, only present, every single day.